When Proton launched the X70 SUV, it had one goal in mind: to elevate the brand's status as one that could compete against mass market brands on its own merit without having to rely solely on a price advantage. Now that that mission has been somewhat completed, depending on who you ask, Proton had to then chart its next course of action to build upon that confidence that it managed to build with the X70 and move forward as a brand that again could compete eye to eye. So the X50, the baby of the Proton SUV lineup, is arguably the more important car here. With more safety, more innovation, more tech and more poise than the X70, the X50 is a product of confidence ever since Proton won great praise, ever since it was inducted into Geely's portfolio of brands. So, the question now is, does the baby brother have what it takes to unseat the prodigal son? My name is Aiman Abdullah and this is Malaysian Motoring. What people tend to forget about the Proton X70 is that it's actually an older car. The Geely Boyer upon which it's based has been around for quite some time, long enough to be subject to one minor facelift and one major facelift in its home market. And as a result, one look at the X70 and you can tell that it is an older car with an old school stance to it and old school proportions to the whole thing. The X50, on the other hand, is clearly a modern vehicle and the product of confidence. It's very clear that Geely's designers were buoyed by the Boyer's success and have proceeded with more confidence through their design and through their design elements. Take a look at this chrome element down the front, for example, the air intakes down on the corner of the bumpers, and even the faux carbon fiber splitter at the front. You can tell that this is a car, or rather a product of a design team that leaned back and said, I know what I'm doing. Down the side, you can see more of that confidence. This angle tends to not be particularly flattering for the X70, but in this car you can see the bold use of lines and creases to make this car look dynamic even when it's standing still. Notice the 18-inch alloy wheels, the dual tone roof, for example, and this noticeable window line kink down the back. This is clearly a product of confidence and it is geared towards a younger, more dynamic buyer profile. But to me, it is the rear that makes the car look its best. I love the fact that it looks so squat and taut, and it looks so purposeful, and I love the use of small design elements. Take these intricately designed tail lights, for example, which light up solid when you hit the brakes. The use of brushed chrome across the rear, as well as this diffuser element with 4 tailpipes, 4 functional exhaust tips on a Proton. But the rear end reveals one of the things I don't like about this car, and it has to do with the boot. One touch of the boot release here, either on the key or via this button here, and it reveals that it's a manual tailgate. Now, while that would be acceptable on lower end variants, unfortunately the entire X50 range comes as standard with a manual tailgate. It's not so much about practicality or functionality, I admit, because it's not that difficult to open the boot. But the reality is, when you are selling a car on the basis that it is premium-ish, this detracts from the overall experience of owning the car. Mercifully though, Proton does offer a power tailgate as an option as part of the urban package for 3,300 ringgit. And while that might seem like a little bit more than what outside competitors and companies are offering, at least it doesn't kacau the 5-year unlimited mileage warranty. If you weren't convinced by the sophistication of the exterior, the interior will win you over immediately. Where the X70 played it safe by offering a non-offensive cabin, nice of course, but completely devoid of anything particularly creative, the X50 throws the bathwater out without the baby. This cabin looks incredibly sophisticated. Its use of materials and complementary color tones is really fantastic. for this flagship model, you get a dual tone interior where you have a red dash top and red inserts on the seats and even a red armrest in the center while everything else is black. And that is offset by this gorgeous brushed aluminium look across the dash. Of course, it isn't, but it looks like it. Now, the two things that you will notice the moment you step into this flagship model are the screens, and there are two of them. So in the driver's line of sight, you have a fully digital instrument cluster, which is limited to the flagship and premium models only, whereas the standard and executive get a couple of analog dials with a central color screen. The center GKUI 19 system, however, for the flagship and premium models sits on a 10.25-inch touchscreen, whereas lower models get an 8-inch touchscreen. Now, talking about GKUI 19, this is the newest interface from Proton, so it's an evolution of what we saw from the X70. The user interface is a little bit more refined, it's a little bit easier to use and easier to navigate, and more importantly, it is a lot snappier than the X70. A lot of X70 customers complain that their cars get a little bit laggy over time. This has no issues thus far. More importantly, with GKUI 19, it integrates a lot of new features, including QD Link, which is a China cut-priced version of Android Auto. It's basically a very rudimentary screen mirroring system which can be used for Android and iOS phones, and it works okay. For Android phones, at least, you can interfere with your Waze and so on via the screen. You don't have to touch on your phone. I'm not sure if that applies to Apple phones, but whatever. We would prefer Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, definitely, because those systems integrate a lot better and they work a lot better for drivers, and there's a lot less for you to faff around with when you're using it. But we'll take what we can get. Anyway, let's move to the back. Now, the rear half of the X50's cabin is where it presents a little bit of a dilemma. Where competitors like the Honda HR-V present you with an expanse of space, the X50 feels a little bit more cosseting. However, if you are of national average height, which I am, you will find that there is more than enough legroom and more than enough headroom. There has been a little bit of intelligence deployed here. The back seats, for example, are scalloped to kind of give you as much space as humanly possible, and the panoramic sunroof blind rolls up just before where your head hits, so you still have plenty of headroom even if you're about 6 foot. What annoys me about the back end of this cabin is the use of materials. Now, while the seats and all are just like the ones up front, unfortunately the door cards are hard, scratchy plastic. Now, I find that this is particularly offensive because, again, you're paying for a car that's well over 100,000 ringgit for the flagship variant, or just under 100,000 ringgit for the premium one. So you would expect that at least this panel would be soft touch. Mercifully, everything else is fine. Like this, you still get some stitched faux leather here and a little bit of faux leather up here, but aside from that, the materials back here are a little bit poor. There are some niceties, however. You do get a couple of charge ports here and rear aircon vents, which are mercifully quite strong. You also get a rear armrest with a couple of integrated cup holders, and I have to say, sitting back here, I could probably do this over a longer distance without much issue. The X50's status as a new car is further underlined by its powertrain, where the X70's 1.8 litre could be described as low-stress clog iron. The X50's powertrain is like a scalpel. So under the bonnet is a 1.5 litre 3-cylinder engine, which produces as standard 150 PS and 225 Newton meters of torque. Now, this engine is derived from Volvo's Drive E modular engine architecture, and all of that power goes to the front wheels via a 7-speed dual clutch automatic. However, in this flagship model, thanks to the use of direct injection versus port injection, this car produces 177 PS and 255 Newton meters of torque. The 0 to 100 time is rated officially at 7.9 seconds, and the lower variants have not yet been tested, and to be frank, we don't really want to test them either. This sophisticated powertrain is matched by an equally sophisticated ride. Now, I know it's going to be very difficult to sort of portray this on camera, but the drive of this car feels a lot less rudimentary than what you get in the X70. One of the bigger brother's biggest flaws is the fact that it feels very basic, very agricultural. It's very soft, it's very spongy, it's basically an old school SUV, and it feels very old school to drive. However, modern drivers expect a little bit more engagement, a little bit more feedback from a modern car, and the X50 certainly delivers that in droves. The X50 doesn't really deserve the moniker of having Proton ride and handling, but it's still not that bad. The road manners of this car have a lot to do with the local expertise of our R&D boys here in Malaysia. The Geely Binue, upon which this is based, and the Geely Coolray in the Philippines both have much stiffer rides. And this has a lot to do with the fact that the Chinese market and Philippine market prefer a stiffer ride because it helps to convey a more sporty and dynamic driving experience. Malaysian owners, however, are a little bit more sophisticated, and so the ride and handling of this car had to be retuned for local tastes. Now, like I said earlier, it's not quite Proton ride and handling. I've no doubt that a Satria Neo drives better than this, and an Iris could run rings around it through the twisties, but it's certainly laudable, and so you have to give it credit for that. Talking about R&D, I'd like to set something straight. This is not a rebadge job in the strictest sense. Yes, this is not a ground-up Proton. However, the conversion from left to right-hand drive was something that was undertaken by Proton's engineers. And it is because of our expertise and our knowledgeability that we've cultivated here locally that we are able to do such things. The Geely Binue was developed as a left-hand drive vehicle from the get-go. So conversion from left to right is not an easy task at all, but it's something that Proton managed to do with only a few hiccups along the way, notably because of the pandemic. So don't go accusing this as being just a rebadge job because you're a xenophobic twat, okay? In terms of comfort and isolation, going back to the review, the X50 is a really strong contender. It's quiet and refined, with the engine only really being heard when you're driving at full pelt. The 3-cylinder thrum is very well isolated from the cabin, and you barely feel the vibrations coming in even at low speed standstills or during a cold start. So there's no doubt in my mind that this car is perfectly capable of ferrying you along over longer distances without much issue. That said, however, there is one point that I'd like to raise. In terms of wind noise, there is a very particular noise that comes through sort of near the wing mirrors at the corner of the windows, which comes through at speeds above 85 kilometers an hour. This was mentioned in a couple of other reviews that I watched before I picked this up. And I honestly thought it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but it is. It's very noticeable, it's a very sharp noise, and you will have to really jack up the music in order to drown it out, and that is a real shame. As I said in the beginning of this review, the Proton X50 is emblematic of Proton's rise to become a proper mass market competitor, one that no longer needs to rely on a price advantage to garner its success. Forget about the local market. With the X50, you can tell that Proton's sights are set on a regional stage, if not further beyond, because this is a properly good car. Even compared to competitors like the Honda HR-V, the Peugeot 2008, and the Mazda CX-3 and CX-30, price advantage aside, this is a properly good car. The fact of the matter is, with the X70, Proton wanted us to forget all that we knew about the brand and see it as a renewed and recharged effort. They have managed to do that somewhat, with plenty of people buying into the Proton brand than ever before. But with the X50, with just under 30,000 bookings received before launch and just over 3,000 delivered as of the end of December, clearly Proton's still got some way to go, but I'm confident that they'll get over those hurdles sooner rather than later. Would I recommend the X50? Absolutely. This is a great all-rounder. Of course, if you want the last word in dynamics in this segment, perhaps you should look at a Mazda CX-3. And if you want the practicality of a small lorry, maybe consider the Honda HR-V. But if you want a B-segment SUV that is good to look at, decent to drive, very safe, and certainly the final word in technologically advanced, this is the car to go for, and that's even before you consider its very attractive price point. Unfortunately, I am not Hafriz Shah, so I can't afford one. However, if you subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell icon and follow MalaysianMotoring on all the social media channels linked in the description below, maybe I'll be able to buy one second-hand from an insurance company as a write-off. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy, jangan bodoh.